enjoy while sitting. May I request all of our distinguished guests to take their seats? We are about to start our final sessions of the day, governing sustainability. We'll have with us in this session Ambassador Retired Tariq Karim as the moderator of the session, and also we'll have His Excellency Mr. Vikram Doraiswamy, High Commissioner of the India to Bangladesh. Also, we'll have Dr. Deva Bhattacharja, Member Center for Policy Dialogue Board of Trustee, Mia Sepo, UN Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh. And as chief guest, we have with us Dr. Mashir Rahman, Economic Affairs Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. And we have with us also our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Tanvir Hassan. This session will be moderated by Ambassador Tariq Karim. So now I am requesting Honorable Ambassador Tariq Karim to start the session.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. I have great pleasure in welcoming today our chief guest, Dr. Mashir Rahman, my elder brother in service, and my friend and our comrade, because I had the privilege of working very closely with him when I was dealing with in Bangladesh-India relations as High Commissioner to India. Incidentally, if there's one person responsible for transformation of relations in terms of how we approach, I would give that credit to Dr. Mashir Rahman, who is the principal author and mover of the framework agreement for cooperation and development that was signed between Bangladesh and India, which actually paved and laid the groundwork for us to go towards regional cooperation. Without that agreement, we would not have been making any progress in many fields. And that led to BBIN and other initiatives regional. Thank you very much, sir, for coming. The other distinguished panelists today are His Excellency Mr. Vikram Doraiswamy, the High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh, who is joining us online because he had to go to India for some consultations and another program. He's on his way back, so he's joining us on telephone. Thank you very much, High Commissioner Doraiswamy. We have Dr. Deva Bhattacharja, member of the CPD Board of Trustees and a distinguished fellow at the CPD, or the Center for Policy Dialogue of Bangladesh, a very distinguished economist, scholar, and diplomat. He has served as Bangladesh's economic representative in Geneva. And of course, we are graced by the presence of the respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Tanvir Hassan, who is here. I would also like to welcome the audience, the faculty members of the IUB family, and the students who are here to this last session. We have had very fruitful, wide-ranging conversations since the morning, because this program is organized by the Department of Global Studies and Governance in the School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. I thank Professor Imtiaz Hussain for his stellar efforts in putting this together in celebration of the Global Day 2021, which has been done regularly by the IUB. And um, in this fruitful sessions that we have in the morning, a number of very, very interesting points have also come out. Um, it brings together the themes of development and economic sustainability or sustainable economic development of the environment, as well as governance issues, which are at the heart of anything that we address in human society. And so we've explored around these subjects, and they have been interesting. It is sustainable development is an organizing principle for meeting human development goals while simultaneously sustaining the ability of natural systems to provide the natural resources and ecosystem services on which the economy and society depend. This term came into limelight in 1987 when the United Nations World Commission on Environment Development released the report known commonly by the name of the book, Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report. Given the name because the commission was headed by the 3 times Prime Minister of Norway, and in honoring her and her contribution. And that book should be a compulsory reading for all students of governance and global studies. It is the sort of the Bible of where thinking came in about how you address sustainable development in this world. It gave forward the definition that sustainable development is development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own need. And those of you who were here in the morning heard the term, and I think it was Mr. Abul Kalam Azad, the former chief coordinator of the Sustainable Development Program of the government, who said that we are already borrowing on the resources. We have consumed the resources we had for our use. We are now borrowing the resources which is due for our future. So in a sense, we have applied the principles of deficit financing in managing our budget, in treating the environment and the resources. The resources are fungible, but they are finite. The nature and man have an incredible capacity to renew itself, but they both need time. And if we keep consuming without allowing nature to renew itself, ultimately that collapses. Nature will collapse. It'll either collapse or it'll hit us back, which is what it is doing today. It is thought of primarily in it used to be along 3 pillars or 3 dimensions: the environment, economy, and society. But a 4th pillar has been added, and that is governance, because it's increasingly understood that unless you can govern the different aspects of everything that goes into what we do in a coordinated manner, not in a dysfunctional, dispersed manner, then we will have problems. A department will do something without taking clearance of another department, and you'll find that trees have been cut by the roads and highways. That way it was, I saw that in Chittagong, without obtaining clearance from the forestry department. Now, that's a classic example where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. That is where governance comes in. So if we are talking about number of issues, even in the Bay of Bengal, we need to look at how do we have a framework for governing the Bay of Bengal, because there are so many issues involved. if we have talked about rules, having rules-based society and rules-based system, then the rules have to follow a certain pattern. That pattern we have to set for ourselves. So without further demands, I will not say anything more now. I will call on the speakers as listed, and we will, of course, the finale of this will be listening to the remarks and the wisdom that those remarks contain from our chief guest, Honorable Dr. Mashur Rahman. May I now request His Excellency, Mr. Vikram Doraiswamy, the High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh, to share his thoughts on this subject of governing sustainability. Over to you, High Commissioner Doraiswamy.
Thank you very much, sir, for the opportunity to join you virtually, and I apologize at the outset for not being there in person. Obviously, I would have liked to do that, but our current travel protocols are that they require us to get a COVID test immediately on arrival. So I'm getting my COVID test, and then I'll be free to be unleashed upon the population once again. Thank you also for the honor of being present in a panel that includes the very distinguished Dr. Mashur Rahman, and of course, Dr. Deva Bhattacharja, and on this UN Day, also, as I believe I can see, our good friend and colleague Mia Seppo. Today is also, for whatever it's worth, Diplomats Day. So there is also that little additional grace in being here on this particular day. Global Day, and I think the opportunity to be part of the Gateway Global Gatekeepers program that you run at IUB is a fascinating opportunity. And I'd like to thank and congratulate the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Tanveer Hussain, for this initiative and for all the exciting and innovative work that IUB does. And you, of course, my dear Ambassador, sir, for your leadership on thinking out of the box and bringing the regional and sub-regional dimension into play. I am, of course, no expert on the subject of environment and the intersect between environment and development, but I would like to say, as a policy maker and as a policy contributor, that we have rapidly reached the stage in our sub-region of needing to go beyond the purely bilateral and the purely multilateral, which is either too low a level of zooming in or too high a level of zooming out, to be able to address the complexities of challenges that are increasingly besetting our sub-region and indeed our planet. First, to frame the challenge, I think it's important for us to recognize that we today live in a sub-region, just the Bay of Bengal community, which is in and of itself about 1.6 billion people, 1.2 billion in India, 170 million in Bangladesh, comprising the two largest chunks. But adding together our other BIMSTEC partners, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, we have another approximately 200 million people right there. So this large mass of humanity is dependent on a fairly limited amount of natural resources and is exceptionally vulnerable to extreme weather and the effects of climate change. So quite clearly, the imperative of managing the environment is increasingly obvious to all of us. And yet at the same time, in developmental terms, we also account for some of the largest numbers in absolute terms of people who have been left behind in developmental terms. We are, of course, proud of the rapid economic development of each of our countries, but we are increasingly beset with inequality of access to income and opportunity, inequality of access to resources, whether it is social or governmental resources or actual natural resources, and of course, inequality of opportunity when it comes to income distribution. So we have both challenges at the same time, and the question of sustainable development is therefore a critical one for us to understand in policy formulation terms. We have a second set of major challenges, which is that our utilization of ground resources, forest resources, water resources, and of course our air, the air that we breathe in this region is increasingly among the worst in the world. So we are faced with the challenge of poor air quality, contamination of ground, of water resources, soil pollution, in other words, in terms of reduction of the nutritive value of soil, and destruction of and excessive draws on water, groundwater resources. We have the challenge of reduced forest cover, which is increasingly besetting most of our region as we look at the extreme impact of the increase of climate, of temperature, and of the reduced of the increased quantity of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere. So how do we bring these pieces together? There is obviously little doubt that the imperative of development is critical. We can no longer afford politically in our democratic environment for people to be left out of the margin of development with the idea that our growth and addressing the immediate developmental needs of our people can be postponed beyond the point. We can no longer also expect that the consensus that sort of started in Rio and has sort of increasingly reached sort of complex solutions will continue to sustain the demands of the developing world for access to technology and access to resources in a way that sustains our development, but in a way that the developed countries can also take back to their electorates. So what is it that we can do collectively to bring forward development in a manner that is technologically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and financially viable? These are complex questions, and I think one very obvious answer is the need for increasing horizontal coordination of growth and the need for increasing vertical consolidation of technologies. So if you were to look at this in graphical terms, technology is fundamentally an x-axis item, where basically you develop vertically upon each item of technology. So from a typewriter, you go to a word processor, to a computer, to a laptop, to a smartphone. And globalization is a y-axis matter, where you essentially horizontally scale out the products. So now, and I can see the economist in the room smiling at the simplistic explanation. But what I'm trying to suggest from a practitioner's point of view is, how do we bring these two forces into play in a way in which developing countries like ours that constitute the BIMSTEC or the Bay of Bengal region into play in a way in which each of us can actually access technologies in a way that is affordable and scale these across the region? I think our great effort right now needs to be to start looking at scaling stuff across our sub-region. If we can find ways in which solutions that are working in Bangladesh or solutions that are working in India or elsewhere in our region, if these can be deployed effectively, let me give you a few examples. Essentially, take the case of effective lighting, LED lighting. Now, LED lighting was for long considered an expensive solution because it was much more expensive than incandescent or fluorescent bulb solutions. Only when it was deployed at scale in India that we managed to make it a cheaper solution than anything else, once you looked at the life cycle cost of the entire lighting solution for an industry or a city. Now, if we could work together to bring some of those solutions here to Bangladesh, that might be a useful solution. Similarly, in Bangladesh, solutions that you've managed in terms of looking at how to economically utilize small plots of land for effective agriculture and effective cropping solutions. Perhaps some of those might be scalable in parts of India where the climatic context is favorable, particularly say Northeast India or in Myanmar and Thailand. Thailand's utilization of Thailand's royal projects, which have been very effective in bringing together sustainable solutions for development in the rural regions of Thailand. Now that could be scaled up and brought to parts of South Asia, where we have comparatively been less able to deploy sustainable solutions in terms of water management. Maybe solutions that have worked in the Maldives, where access to clean water is a major challenge. Maybe these could be looked at in terms of our island possessions or in terms of our coastal regions where saltwater intrusion is a major problem. So scalability is one major set of solutions that we could look at. My final point about technology access and sub-regional cooperation. If we are able to look at ways in which we can jointly cooperate in accessing and deploying technologies, we may then be able to make them economically viable for us to utilize. A case in point, air conditioning. It is reasonable to assume that as prosperity levels increase across our region, there would be, it is only to be expected, let's say, that people will seek access to air conditioning solutions for comfort, for more productive work environment, for more productive recreational environments, etc. Now, if we can find a way in which HFC-free air conditioning solutions are made available to us at scale, then the higher cost of deploying the solution could perhaps be mitigated a little bit. Now, so therefore, we need to find a way in which we leverage the size of our collective region, we leverage the needs of our collective sub-region, and we leverage the opportunity that the world's sort of recognition of the complexities of environmental challenges that our world is facing, and we get the world to help us deploy these solutions across the sub-region. So in short, therefore, this is a plea for looking at ways and deploying intellectual capital to find ways in which we start thinking out of the box across boundaries and bringing together solutions that might actually work well for us. That would make a global solution or a series of sub-regional solutions appropriate such that we could say we are thinking locally, but acting globally. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to a chance to be able to respond, if anything, to comments thereafter. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Vikram. I was a little distracted, so I didn't catch your last remarks. But thank you very much for your insightful comments, and thank you very much for joining me, even though you are in between Guwahati and Dhaka. I don't know where you are now, right now, in Kolkata or somewhere, for giving us your inputs to this. You made one point which particularly resonated with me, that there is a necessity to go beyond bilateralism to thinking regionally. I think we have just started doing that after many years of having a mindset of closing ourselves to each other. And although the pathway to regionalism has been thorny, we also understood finally along the way that perhaps you need to think in segments of sub-regions, which, if successful, would attract other sub-regions in the near vicinity to come and join you in the project. So what you were saying about horizontal growth can only be achieved, and the vertical, they can only come together if, in a sense, in the horizontal process, you can somehow spur that necessity in the minds of people that we need to work together on many things. And we are progressing slowly. Hope it will perhaps takes a little bit more time, but I think with commitment, dedication, and young minds, the future is the young generation who are represented here and listening to all of us, to people like you, who, like me, have been in the trenches trying to change mindsets. hopefully they will reach where we could not take them. With those words, I now request Dr. Deva Bhattacharja. His CV is there for everyone to see. It's displayed there. But I know him as a friend for a long time, a personal friend. And as I said, he has served us with distinction, not only in a diplomatic post, in economic diplomacy, presenting and protecting and projecting Bangladesh's interest in Geneva, at the WTO negotiations and elsewhere. But he is a noted economist in his own standing and one of the founders of the well-known, very well-known, one of the oldest established think tanks in Bangladesh, the Center for Policy Dialogue. Dr. Deva.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tariq Karim. It's indeed my unique pleasure that this is the second time I'm sharing with you the podium in the last 28 hours. So it is becoming a habit. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I would like to also pay my respect to Dr. Moshir Rahman for being here and listening to us, and would be looking forward to listening to his comments. I definitely thank the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Tanveer Hussain, and also Dr. Imtiaz Hussain for giving me this unique opportunity to be here with you today, along with the students of IUB. I have listened with great rapt attention to Ambassador Duraisamy. That was I think a fantastic expose that how do you really discuss governing sustainability in terms of sub-regional cooperation and give us the technological solutions, both in terms of scale and scope, and how do you leverage the concrete solutions in that way. So bringing down those kind of esoteric concepts into realities is an ability which the High Commissioner has just demonstrated. Thank you very much. I was not laughing because I'm not disagreeing. I was just laughing how you are interpreting them as a technological solution in double access system. Thank you very much. And I know that after me, it will be no less a person than the esteemed, UNRC in Dhaka. Mia Sepo will be speaking. So I'll have to be very circumspect about whatever I say in the coming minutes in that way. So having said that, let me come to the issue. So the subject matter is governing sustainability. In that case, I think we need to have a bit of a clarity about what we are talking about over here, the scope of the concept of governance. So very simply said, governance is the exercise of political, administrative and economic power, or political, economic and administrative power or authority, which is done through certain methods, processes, and also institutions. So the two parts of it is that there has to be some legitimate authority, and there has to be some processes in order to exercise that authority. And the definition of sustainability, as has been given by Ambassador Tariq Karim, which is the Brundtland report, is that you do not compromise with the ability of the future to deal with their needs while we satisfy our own needs. Now, governing the sustainability would mean, to my mind, is that whether we have adequate processes, methods, systems, and institutions in place so that we do not compromise future's ability while we meet our own needs over these cases. So that is, do we have the authority or adequate authority or legitimate authority with adequate methods to deal with the current issues while not disturbing the future? So this is the adequacy issue. For me, so that the adequacy issue becomes very pertinent. Now, since it's a global day, and no less the Day of Diplomats, as has been mentioned, so let me stick more to the global part in that way. So the issue is, do we have adequate authority and adequate processes in place in order to ensure sustainability? And this case, in sustainability, of course, we will be interpreting it in terms of the 2030 agenda of sustainable development. That is the new global consensus, as we all know. So if that be the case, incidentally, the Ambassador Tariq Karim and also the High Commissioner has taken the traditional, in certain ways, it's not a critique, it's an observation, of the looking at the sustainability, taking the environmental approach. And once we did the 2015-2030 agenda, we try to, resuscitate the whole sustainability concept from the exclusive environmentalist approach to bringing in the other two pillars, the economic and the social. And there are many ways of defining the pillars. But what was important in that sustainability paradigm, which was being done, the three pillars, and the fourth pillar, of course, was supposed to be the governance. But in the international politics did not allow us to bring the fourth pillar in the sustainability discussion. SDGs are the fourth pillar. What we had is the goal number 16. The goal number 16 is the jewel in the crown, as we say, is about the rule of law and about the good governance and also human rights and etc. So for us, the goal number 16 is not a pillar. Governance is a pillar. For us, it is the foundation of all the other three pillars. And what is the capping of this housing in that way? For us, the capping of the housing is the partnership, global partnership. So Ambassador Duraisamy has mentioned about the partnership in the bilateral and sub-regional context, but I want to delve on it more on global context in that way. So the issue is that the three pillars standing on a foundation of the human rights and good governance, and with a coverage, packaged by the global partnership. And that is where we stand. And let me look at it. How robust is this current structure in the current world? So if we look at the landscape currently here, and if I take a relatively recent past horizon over here, so what we see, the first and foremost we have a dysfunctional multilateral system. It's a dysfunctional multilateral system or a system in atrophy, and which is not being able at this moment to solve the global conflictual situation and could not give satisfactory resolutions to many of the global problems as it goes. So it is not only in case of the Rohingya refugees, but also it goes back to the Middle East and thereafter maybe at the newest one in Afghanistan and also in Europe and Latin America. So the functioning of the multilateral system is one of the major fault lines in terms of having that perspective, what we are talking about on adequacy. The second one is that, from the 60s onward, there was a gold standard of global values because processes, methods, and authorities cannot function without a set of, agreed values or a shared value system. The shared value system had been the Declaration of Universal Human Rights. So all human beings are to be treated equal, irrespective of race, religion, gender, and everything else. The question is, are we see fragmentation of that universality? So this is the second issue which is now haunting us in many ways, as we see that there are ideologically driven many other aspects which is undercutting this universal human rights charter which we have all signed up to. The third issue on this dysfunctional or the landscape of global sustainability governance is the third issue, is the lack of leadership. Historically, the northern countries, the OECD countries have provided the leadership. Then we have seen the rise of the South. We have seen China getting into the Security Council. We have seen India getting into a much more major limelight in the global governance. The issue is, in the current circumstances, and we have seen also the European Union in certain cases doing the bridge building over here, and in a benign way, Japan and others, we currently, in the current circumstances, do not see any resolute, effective, or legitimate leadership to take issues forward. That is a major fault line for any system to operate. So if the first is the dysfunctional multilateralism, second is the fragmentation of the human rights values, third is the lack of leadership. What is the fourth one? Fourth one issue has already been addressed partly by Ambassador High Commissioner Duraisamy, is the degradation of natural resources. So what we see over here is the inefficient resource allocation, and not only the degradation, along with that. So the inefficient resource allocation money in particular, is that we are not necessarily allocating globally resources where there is the marginal utility is the highest, particularly in favor those who whose marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to invest is much more high over here. So that is the left behind people in this case. So it is not a question of liquidity in the world at this moment. We have enough liquidity floating around in various places, but the issue is we do not have an adequate mechanism to mop up those liquidity and put them into the service of the sustainable development goals. That would be the other. I would also add to that is that the current global circumstances, the global framework has shown its not total, that would be too much to say, a great incompetence in terms of managing global public goods or providing global public goods. Whether it concerns securities, where Bangladesh is a great contributor in the global public goods, or whether it comes to the climate action issues. And if you take the most recent one, dealing with pandemics and the health hazards in certain ways. So we do not have a viable, robust system, which not only to be an early responder, but also in a sustainable way to look at those issues as we move. Possibly one of the last points would be that in this global governance system, you see it is dominated by the intergovernmental processes. It is more the governmental processes and methods which really make the decisions, and they are the legitimate representative of the nation state. These are all very well taken. But all these solutions demands multi-stakeholder approach. All these if we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach, so we would need also stronger complementary processes and sub-processes which involves the non-state actors. The voices of the non-state actors will be very critical in terms of not only addressing the inequality, which was mentioned by the High Commissioner, but also in terms of ensuring the future, the harmonized allocation of resources as it goes. I would not really lose out making a point on the regional issues. All the global systems are based on some of the other, not building regional building blocks. But if you look at these current global circumstances as we see, the regional building blocks are weakening. I mentioned this when I look at looking at European Union. It is not only because of Brexit, but also the problem they're having with Czechoslovakia or the Poland in that case. I also say that looking at ASEAN, where they have just challenged the Myanmarese junta government. And I also recall with great regret that we have also what you call a dead horse called SARC. So in these cases, so we don't see the global governance being sustained or supported by the regional processes, which are in the early 60s, 70s, 80s, we have seen. Let me say one or two sentences, if the chair allows me, on the issue of the current, the issues of the current country scenarios. Let me mention just one or two of them. What are the fault lines in the current scenario? One of the major, I think, good practices of having a sustainable governing sustainability is that to have a whole of society approach. This is also part of the multi-stakeholder issue. If we need to have a whole of society approach, the issue is it will all again connect back to the issue of complementing the intergovernmental processes with the voices of the non-state actors. It is also because that have become very difficult on two counts. One is the left behind people, and now we have a new group called pushed behind people because of the COVID. They do not have adequate space and voice. And that includes the youth community in particular. So we have seen that the younger generation, we have not found a good mechanism to include these voices who are supposed to be the stakeholders or the custodians of the future governance of the sustainability. Along with that, we have also seen across the world, and Bangladesh, unfortunately, regrettably, is not exception, is that the squeezing space of the civic society in the context of constrained democratic polity. That also created a bit more hurdles in terms of accessing the whole of society approach in that way. We have also seen the challenges of inequality. And this inequality, what has emerged is not only income poor issue. We have seen different forms of marginalization, and we have different differentiation nowadays. New underclasses are coming, and these underclasses will become much more prominent as we approach the fourth industrial revolution. The skill deficit, the access deficit, the voice deficit, all these things will take together. I would not go further on this country scenario. Let me conclude a bit on a positive note. Every crisis has its own silver lining. I think the COVID pandemic has that as well. The COVID pandemic has brought forth, as I say, all those issues which we have been arguing for the last decade. And with all our data statistics, we could not convince that only spending 1% of the GDP on the health sector is a shame on a middle-income country. We wanted to say that 2% spending on education for a middle-income country like Bangladesh is also a matter of great, dishonor. The COVID really exposed all the fault lines what we have in our society, globally and nationally and regionally. Economists like us were totally out of business, and the people through their own experience learned that where the fault lines lies. Now the challenge is to build back better. But when we build back better, that has to also address the initial problems in our benchmark, all the inequalities with which we went into the pandemic. So I think that this post-pandemic recovery opportunity, that is a part of the sustainability, governing sustainability will be a unique opportunity for us to address all those fault lines which I have been trying to list to you and just spoiling your post-lunch appetite in this case. But I must tell you, this is a possibility. The technology issue which the High Commissioner referred to had been the solution for many ways, but technologies do not function in vacuum. It has to have the enabling environment. It has to have the legitimacy, transparency, accountability, and participation of the people, particularly the young people who are going to take it forward. I'm really pleased and honored that I got this opportunity to share my thoughts with you today afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deva Bhattacharja, for your very thoughtful, insightful, thought-provoking remarks and comments. Very cogent in today's world. As in the end you stated that impact of COVID-19 has actually sharpened the deficiencies that we have in the governance structure of ensuring sustainable development. And this is not just for us here, it was global. The most powerful and strongest economies and countries had discovered that they also had these same shortcomings. And we who were hostage to that larger globalization process perhaps suffered a lot. And to our credit, perhaps some of the smaller countries were on the rebound faster in adapting than some of the larger countries. This is again a learning process. So thank you very much for that. And I hope our students will take away from this a lot of thoughts and translate this into their own discussions when they come. And if they have Q's and A's in the end, in the Q&A section, the questions, they're happy to either have it in-house or outside. Thank you very much for being with us. I now will call on Ms. Mia Seppo. She represents the United Nations system in Bangladesh. She is coordinating all their activities here. She has been an excellent, a good friend, a very warm friend to me personally, and to Bangladesh in general, on the whole. And I request her to come and share her thoughts. Her bio is there on the digital screen there. It's a very fulsome and very impressive bio that she brings before she came here.
A very good afternoon to all of you, and let me start by wishing you a happy UN Day. We're celebrating UN Day at a time when we are looking at a world which is facing overlapping crises, a crisis of climate, a crisis of COVID, a crisis of coherence, a crisis of backlash against human rights, including in particular the rights of women and girls. This overlapping crisis proves one thing: the continued relevance of the values that the United Nations stands for and the UN Charter. It is a great pleasure and honor to be celebrating the UN Day in Bangladesh, a country that has, since its very beginning of its membership with the United Nations in 1974, been a very active member of the UN and part of the various conversations shaping the global agenda. On this particular event, let me salute the chief guest. Looking forward to hearing your comments. Very pleased and honored to be speaking after the Indian High Commissioner and Deva, and very much recognizing that you have had a full day of very rich conversations. Do you remember in coal mines when they used to have canaries? The bird. Do you remember what was the task of the bird? When the bird died, the miners knew they had little time to get out of the mine before they would die, because the faster metabolism of the bird meant the bird died faster and human beings had a little bit of time. All birds around the world is like the canary. When ecosystems are threatened, when birds become extinct, it's a warning sign to all of us. And sadly, continuously, we don't hear the birds, we don't take the warning signs, we don't act and take action. Around the world, we continue to witness and be part of the destruction of the environment, of entire ecosystems, with little thought to the long-term impact of our actions, very much threatening that consideration to future generations that Brundtland called for and the previous speakers have referred to. This failure to protect the planet, including the precious resources that we also heavily depend on to survive, is in fact a failure of good governance. As a result, we now face a sustainability crisis, which can only be remedied through radical changes in the actions of governments all around the world. I would like to take this opportunity to tackle 3 issues, and I will shorten the speech a bit because of the rich comments by previous speakers. I will talk about the need for environmental governance to be inclusive. I will speak about climate security, and I will speak about water. On the importance of inclusive environmental governance, the concept advocates for sustainability to be the primary consideration in the management of all human activities, and the management includes the participation of a diverse section of the population, including government, private sector, civil society, NGOs, youth. This level of cooperation between government and citizens results in stronger environmental policies that are more robust, resilient, and ultimately more sustainable, and can include, for example, improved disaster risk management and reduction strategies, better natural resource management, and more sustainable adaptation to climate change impacts. This is critically important in Bangladesh, which experiences climate and environmental change that is highly localized, different in different parts of the countries. Yet, we have communities that are most affected, often excluded from the decision-making processes, despite the value of local knowledge to understand the local needs and, in fact, to inform the decisions that needs to be made. This can lead to maladaptation, which can have harmful consequences for communities, which, such as inadvertently increasing marginalization or pushing populations into further vulnerable positions. Planning and implementing policies through inclusive environmental governance structures can serve not only to mitigate those adverse impacts, but can also help develop better solutions that are adapted to those localities, and therefore just and democratic outcomes for those most vulnerable to environmental and climate change. Similarly, inclusive environmental governance can help strengthen oversight of business practices that often undermine the environment and natural resources that serve as the lifeline for the communities. Ambassador Tariq Karim already referred to Chittagong Hill Tracks, which is a point to emphasize. More rigorous oversight of business practices is needed to help prevent activities that can undermine ecosystems and support businesses to reconcile economic growth with environmental protection through more inclusive climate and environmentally sensitive practices. And I think it's important to recognize that these more sustainable business practices are not only ethical, are not only called for because of the climate emergency. Looking to future consumer choices, they actually are good for business as well. The second point is the importance of advancing the climate security agenda. On climate security, this is a concept which is increasingly gaining traction at the global stage. And for this group of researchers and scholars, I believe it is of interest to you. It's widely recognized that the effects of climate change can seriously undermine the well-being of individuals and societies, compromising human security, increasing internal migration, impacting vital infrastructure, including water, food, health, and the economy. However, the impact on social stability is less clear. In instances where a link between climate change and conflict can be drawn, it is generally non-linear and indirect, with the effects of climate change intersecting with various social, political, economic, and demographic factors to create conditions conducive to the outbreak of violence. The climate conflict nexus is increasingly understood by identifying how climate change increases the risk of violent conflict by exacerbating existing fragilities that heighten risk. I think it's worth noting that increasing number of complex UN peacekeeping missions include climate in their mandate. And when you look at the link between climate and conflict and risk, the Lake Chad Basin can, for example, serve as an example. This means in order to prevent conflict and sustain peace, in a world increasingly devastated by climate change, we must treat these existing fragilities as a matter of urgency. In Bangladesh, despite laudable investment in climate change adaptation and disaster risk management, the country's climate-related vulnerabilities continue to outweigh its adaptive capacities, creating a host of human security risks, which, if left unchecked, could undermine national peace and sustainable development. The impacts of climate change on human security are already widely felt. References have been made by the previous speakers to the north, where you see the floods undermining food and livelihood security, or the coastal belt, and the High Commissioner for India referred to saltwater intrusion and the conditions in the coastal areas. When you look to the future, most analysts say that the next wave of human movement will be caused by climate. And it will be at a scale and a magnitude of something we have never seen before. The current and prospective rate of climate change-induced migration and displacement are profound, with increased movement towards urban center places, placing stress on already weak social infrastructure, leaving millions without shelter, food, and economic opportunities, and at a heightened risk to various forms of exploitation and abuse. With mass land loss and damage to property expected as a result of extreme weather-related events, heavy monsoon rains, and rising sea levels, the potential for climate change to aggravate unsolved land disputes and create new sources of tension between groups competing over limited resources is profound. And with the impacts of climate change expected to worsen in the decades to come, climate-related security risks of this kind needs to be urgently addressed. This demands urgent interventions to help address existing fragilities and vulnerabilities to ensure that the basic needs and fundamental human rights of those most vulnerable to the impacts of climate and environment are met, and that no one is left behind in the socioeconomic development journey in Bangladesh and elsewhere. And the previous speaker, Deva, referred to SDG 16 and the principle of leaving no one behind. This may all sound a little bit bleak, but I think it is to serve as a wake-up call. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, referred in the session to the Human Rights Council, Bangladesh being a member, that climate is the gravest threat to human rights. Bangladesh has taken the initiative to call for a special rapporteur on climate and human rights to protect and promote human rights in climate. So this is very much to illustrate that Bangladesh understands the urgency of these issues. Now moving to my last point, water. Climate-related security risks will increasingly transcend borders, with water security in particular demanding urgent regional governance and collective response. Climate change will inevitably increase water scarcity, and this is already seen in the coastal region of Bangladesh and elsewhere. Indeed, most climate change impacts are transmitted through the water cycle, and 90% of all diseases are water related. I will not speak specifically on the very complex river basin system that Bangladesh is part of, because there's other speakers who have spoken before me who know this so much better, and also the chief guest will no doubt speak about this complex river basin. But I want to draw your attention to the Water Convention. A major tool of the UN to strengthen transboundary water cooperation is the Convention on the Protocol and Use of Transboundary Water Courses and International Lakes, the so-called Water Convention. I would urge the government of Bangladesh to build on its global leadership on climate action, to become one of the first countries in South Asia to sign the convention. The convention and its task force on water and climate supports countries in developing transboundary adaptation strategies and implementation of priority adaptation measures through guidance, projects on the ground, and exchange of experience. Regional action and cooperation to address climate-related security risks does not stop with water, however. There is also an urgent need to address human security risks of increased climate-induced migration. I already referred to Bangladesh in that context, but it's important to recognize that while internal migration is one aspect of it, transborder migration as a result of extreme weather events, as well as the slow onset impact of climate change, is a global challenge that we must begin to understand better and address. To conclude, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has explicitly placed climate change as a central element of the UN's prevention agenda, and so have many key member states. This is to drive down the point of the importance of understanding the nexus between not just development and humanitarian and recovery, but also the climate nexus in this context. So with these remarks, I hope I have illustrated why inclusive environmental governance is important, and why we need to give a seat to those most impacted by climate change in order to avoid them being left behind. Second, I hope I have given the researchers and the scholars in this room an interest in looking closer to the climate conflict nexus, because this is something we need to understand for the future. And third, I hope I have increased your interest in looking into the Water Convention, which is one of the tools trying to tackle these problems. Thank you for listening, and once again, a happy UN Day.
Thank you very much, Mia Seppo, for a very comprehensive tour d'horizon of what the UN goals are, what you're doing to help Bangladesh, and what you're trying to help the global community, not just Bangladesh, but through Bangladesh, the regional and global community, in addressing some questions and problems that loom and embrace everyone. When one person is hurt, everybody is hurt. Like John Donne had stated, the late 17th century poet, no man is an island. And indeed, we have learned from globalization that no man is an island. I will not try to even summarize your wide-ranging view, but I will, what struck chords in me with 3 points you raised. The climate security nexus. As a practitioner, I have seen how this plays out. And there is a theory which I think, since it was first propounded in 1982, that climate vulnerability or climate degradation combined with resource depletion or scarcity eventually translates into human conflict. Human conflict basically starts with conflict over resources. Who gets how much of what? And who controls how much of everything? And from the individual to the community, to the national, to the sub-regional, that's how it expands. And therefore, this climate is over all of us. That's what we have to understand. And whoever is causing it, I think while there is some logic behind trying to say you are doing more pollution and I'm not, but the fact is, in the end, all of us are hurting the same. Even those who are not polluting are getting hurt, perhaps more because they are more vulnerable in many other ways. So that was number one, which resonated with me personally as a former practitioner. The second is the water scarcity. This is looming crisis which is going to hit us very hard, and that's why Bangladesh itself took a leading role, and perhaps Dr. Mashiraman will also talk about it, of why we need to shift the emphasis on our discussion, which in the last 50 years or 70 years has been sharing. But as I mentioned in my earlier session, we used to manage. There was no question of sharing because we were all one integrated ecosystem. The minute we draw cartographic lines, water became a national subject. It is subject to the Westphalian paradigm that this is mine, you cannot intrude, that is, I will not give you that. But water flows, it doesn't follow man's laws. And therefore, if we learn how to manage it, and we can only do it if we approach a basin approach of management. We used to do that naturally for thousands of years. We have forgotten it in the Westphalian paradigm of the last 75 years. So we need to recapture it. But let us remember, Europe fought 2 world wars. They fought numerous wars, but they have 2 exemplary examples of water basin managements. And that's done through the administration of 2 commissions, the Rhine Commission and the Danube Commission. One was formed 200 years earlier, one was formed 150 years earlier. And they are vibrant, functioning commissions even today. Can we not move towards that direction? Instead of treating water as sovereign national goods, and even within India, they have problems because different states have disputes with each other, and water is a state subject. So just like nation states are saying, this is my water, I'll not give to you, the provincial states are saying, this is not my water, I'll not give to you. So we have to somehow overcome, make a paradigm shift in the way we think. So thank you very much for your remarks. I will now call on Vice Chancellor Tanveer Hassan to say a few words on the subject. He is quite competent in this, and he will introduce the person who will have the final say in this proceeding.
Honorable guests, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. For everybody's correction, my last name is Hassan, not Hussein. So it's pronounced as Tanveer Hassan, just to clarify. As I said in the morning, I returned to Bangladesh after 34 years in the US. So there are differences between the priorities and what is hot topic between the two countries. I'm learning my ropes. And my background is in accounting and finance. So in the earlier session, all of a sudden, when I was called upon to comment on Bay of Bengal, I freaked out because there was no previous warning given to me. But this one was not given warning to me either. But I volunteered because this is something I do for research, and maybe not in terms of climate change or other fields, but some of the things I would like to share with you, there may be some takeaways from all of you, because it applies to every facet wherever you're talking about sustainability and governance. For a starter, it's very, very encouraging to see that UN is talked about at the university level. My 30 years of experience there, UN clubs and this and that basically are high school activities. Very seldom at the university level, UN is talked about. And the general feeling among the population is, oh, UN, that costs us money. That's the general feeling of the people there. So it doesn't get much attention in the university level, but it's talked about a lot in high school level, and the clubs and the competitions are geared to high schools. Given that, I am, like I said, from a business perspective, was very much involved in governance and sustainability. What is sustainability? I mean, there are some little different interpretations as to what it is, depending on who is looking at it. From a finance and accounting perspective, sustainability means you are able to recover your cost and you can stand on your feet. In terms of governance, there are two types of governance. It's called internal governance and external governance. External governance is what our folks were referring to, all the distinguished guests. It could be regulation. In terms of accounting, it could have, like, for example, inviting an auditor to audit your accounts. That's an external control. But there are internal controls as to how you arrange your organization, what kind of boards you compose. So both kind of governance has impact on sustainability or profitability. And so what drove this sustainability drive? From finance and accounting perspective, when we had a lot of subsidized organization aimed towards social sector development, for example, MFIs, the whole idea was at some point in time, the donors, were the suppliers of funds, were no longer ready to put the resources just as a subsidy. So they changed the pattern of funding. So for these organizations to get funding from external sources and from private sources or from conventional sources, it was in their interest to become sustainable, because without being sustainable, they cannot get money from independent sources. Whereas when you are subsidized, it's easy coming to you. So it serves as a signaling device for an organization to tell externals that, hey, we can stand on our feet, get us some money to keep it going. Because then the user of the fund also knows it's used in the best possible way for its intended purpose. Now, there are best practices in this field. I'm sure a lot of them can be borrowed and used in the context of the discussion that we are having. One of the examples Ambassador Karim and Mia Sapporo were talking about, specifically the example that you gave about roads and highways chopping the trees in Chittagong, and the left-hand side doesn't know the right-hand side. And the speakers called it failure of governance. In the university setting, if you are doing something and the vice chancellor's office are not properly briefed, that's a failure of governance, in my opinion. So I'm talking globally and then locally, as Ambassador Vikram Goswami was talking about, think globally, act locally. So the example Ambassador Karim gave was global example. And the local example is, if you are within the university and you don't, the vice chancellor's office doesn't know the whole story, that's a failure of governance to me. I see young students in the audience who participated in the essay competition. And I see some young men in uniform. That made me nostalgic because I have a similar background like you folks. I see young girls here who competed and gathered together. I would like you to know that you are still in high school. IUB is a wonderful place to go to school. And it's transforming. We have various programs here within the engineering school, within the business school, and within the liberal arts school. And we also have pharmacy and life sciences program. So as you move on to your next level of education, please do look up IUB. And I would invite you to apply to one of our programs that we have. Now, to give you a little background of what's going on, as I mentioned, IUB is transforming. And I mentioned this morning, and I'll repeat it, because good stories need to be repeated. We have had the highest enrollment in the history of IUB in the last 2 consecutive semesters. This year alone, we have already received $3.8 million, $3.2 million for research grants, and a whole lot of it has to deal with climate change. So, which is very relevant to this discussion, which will provide platform for our students and faculty to do research around climate changes. We also received 4.8 crore taka in personal gift so far this year. And all of that money will be used for you all, for your research, for your transition to the university. For the girls who are here from high school, we also have some news for you. We have increasing number of female students coming to IUB, and we polled them, and they expressed their frustration that they do not have their own footing in this university in terms of the clubs that are male dominated, according to them. So as per my survey, I found out that they want martial arts coaches. So I appointed nationally known martial arts coaches for them. They wanted yoga coaches. So I got yoga instructors for them. And to my delight, they wanted to play basketball. I was guessing they would prefer badminton. They didn't. And they preferred for basketball. As I announced this morning, IUB will have the first female basketball team at the university level in Bangladesh starting next year. We offer a lot of scholarship money. Last year, we offered 20 crore taka in scholarship to our students. So to all of you who are sitting in the audience and participated in the essay competition, please consider IUB as your choice for college. With that sales pitch, let's move back to the main program. We have the privilege of having among us Dr. Mashur Rahman. Dr. Rahman was appointed as the Economic Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister of the Government of People's Republic of Bangladesh since 2009, with special responsibility for regional economic cooperation. He started his career with civil service in 1965, where he worked in various positions in the government. Dr. Rahman has also represented government as alternate or acting governor at multilateral institutions such as World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and Islamic Development Bank. He was elected as director of the Board of Islamic Corporation for Private Sector Development and governor at the International Fund for Agriculture Development and chairman of its evaluation committee till mid-1980s. He was also vice chair of Islamic Development Bank and chaired business sessions at the annual meeting in Algiers in 2001. Dr. Rahman completed his PhD from John F. Kennedy School of Government of Harvard University in 1980. He obtained his Master's of Public Administration and Masters of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. His political affiliation lies with Bangladesh Awami League. He has been elected as a member of Awami League's Advisory Council and also acted as second co-convener of Parliamentary Election Committee in 2008, 2014, and 2018. Without any further delay, it's my privilege to yield the floor to our honorable guest, Dr. Mushir Rahman.
I thank the organizers for inviting me. And also I'm grateful for the kind but substantially untrue introduction that they have given. I wonder if you have ever seen that sitcom on BBC, or it was a British production. And people from the Commonwealth countries go to Britain, and Britain had an establishment to teach them English. So they have an episode where a subcontinental woman goes to a shop. She sees on the shelf a promotional sales slogan, buy one, get one free. She thinks that she can take away the free one and doesn't have to buy the one. So a civil service is like that. If you get into civil service, you buy one, but get a lot of that free. So the rest of it was free, bonus for something that I did earlier. I do not have a prepared speech, and I do not want to make any point as my previous speakers have done. They were very articulate, very informed. I must admit that I don't know so much. And maybe some of the things that I know or may talk about would be somewhat dated. Let us start with Brundtland Commission. And as Ambassador Karim had said, it did define very clearly the issue of excessive use of the resources that we have. The resources of the world are finite. So if we use too much of it, it is going to get exhausted. And if it gets exhausted, we also get stuck somewhere in our way and in our daily life. But to go back a little further, and something which is not usually talked about, there was a Bengali gentleman, Farhad Jalal. He worked at UNSCAP. He had done a PhD at Harvard, then worked at UNSCAP, went over to Asian Development Bank after retirement, back to Harvard, and he taught a few courses. He and Mr. Peter Rogers of Harvard Design School have co-authored a book on concept of sustainability. They trace it back to sometimes in 19th century to a forest officer in Germany. He said that when you fell trees in a forest, you have to regenerate an equal number of trees. And he said that is the beginning of sustainability, that you don't exhaust resources, you don't use up resources more than you regenerate. That was, in their view, the beginning of the concept. But when we talk about environmental degradation, resource exhaustion, and so on, we move fast forward to sometimes the 20th century, maybe in the late 60s, 1960s or late 1970s. There was a group called Club of Rome. They were not in Rome, they were in Cambridge, USA. They wrote a book, Limits to Growth, where they contended, and they did make many projections, that if resources continue to be used at the present scale, in X number of years, I do not remember how many years they said, in so many years we will exhaust the resources and civilization will burst. That was their grim projection. That led to some serious concern in the academic circle. There was one mathematical demographer at Harvard, Nathan Keffis. He wrote an article in Science saying that if the profligate lifestyle of the middle class is not moderated, then the world will soon get to extinction. There was a lesser known professor at University of somewhere in Carolina, University of Duke, Julian Simon. He bet that those who are claiming that the civilization will come to end because the resources will not be there, I challenge them to have a bet with me. They will choose any commodity which sells on the exchange, and I will say that the price will not go up because there will not be any shortage of those resources. He won. But that was on the lighter side. The serious problem with this Club of Rome was that they made a linear projection of whatever is going on. The use of resources are non-linear for various reasons. Among them is the technological changes. I guess I will come to that later on. Now, as to the sustainable development, I think the the strongest advocate of it has been Jeffrey Sachs, who now is the director of Art Institute at Columbia and is an advisor or special advisor to UN Secretary General on sustainable development. He had earlier written a book on End Poverty in Our Lifetime. That was more on the Millennium Development Goal. And later on, he wrote also The Age of Sustainability, where he talks about the sustainable development and why it is necessary and what it requires to do. Now, in that book, he says that sustainable development is an ethical and an economic program. Ethical because it has more or less, it comprehends all the welfare implications that we know of and we can talk about. And then it also says how it can be programmed that we achieve the sustainable development goal. There are three things he talks about. One is the geography, which includes climate, which includes resource endowment, which includes proximity to seas, and all kinds of things that you see on the surface and which are necessary for carrying on your economic activities. Then he says that macroeconomic, that's an interesting part. He talked about the macroeconomics about the time that the Washington Consensus or the libertarian economics was under attack, if not defeated and pushed to the back seat. But he argues that economics needs balance between savings and investment, between resources the government can raise and the government can use, production and consumption, which in the formulation of the UN becomes accountable production and consumption, and resource exhaustion is there. And then he says that it needs a clinical approach. That's an unconventional, unusual term in economics, but that's an interesting story. When a child having some psychological problem is taken to a clinical psychologist, he or she gets a full story of the child's background, the way the child is growing up, the way the parents look after the children, and so on. And he says that when you talk about economics, you have to look at the detailed features of the economic situation, and only then you can suggest what you need to do. Now, where did he get this clinical economics, which is not used ever in economics? His wife, incidentally, was a clinical pediatric psychologist, and he borrowed the term from his wife. So it's important that in resource use, in financial resource use at least, there is a balance between what we have and what we use. Now, he has also a challenging concept. He says that sustainable development concept is a meta comprehensive system. The meta makes it all the difficult. He says that it comprehends many other systems like climate systems and environmental systems, resource systems, human activity systems, and so on. You name anything that human beings are aware of and human beings engage in doing. Those are all systems. And this mega system, or whatever is the name, comprehends all that. And these are all interacting. And since these are interactive, these are not linearly changing. There is non-linearity. It sometimes bends, it sometimes goes back. So you are in a world which you cannot foresee completely, and therefore you cannot program completely with satisfaction. In that puzzling world, you bring the global governmental system. And the global governmental system consists of a large number of governments. Why government? You need, when you get a large number of people to work together, to talk to each other and to agree and disagree, you need to identify them clearly so that you can say, this is what X said and this is what Y said. If you cannot identify them, it becomes very difficult to attribute the remarks and also to work towards agreement and also to work towards specifying what are the points at issue and what were the disagreements. Then you need to recognize the government as the main representative of a nation or a state. You do look at what and who the government represent, but that remains that you don't mention that very clearly. You do emphasize that the government speaks for the people of the country that it represents, and therefore it is presumed that they're representing the country. But increasingly, we have recognized that the government may not represent the whole country. There may be dissenting opinions, maybe opinions which are at odds with the government. Therefore, you try to find ways to bring in the opinions of those who are not exactly part of the government, but those who represent significant sections of the population which the government represents. So that is why the intergovernment system dominates the multilateral systems or the UN systems. It may not do always as good as you expect, but it is perhaps the only way we know of getting people together and getting nations together to talk to each other and identify what they can do or what they may not do. Now let me get back to this environment and climate and so on. Sometimes in the 70s or maybe 80s, Sarkozy was president of France. He set up a commission headed by Stiglitz, who got a Nobel Prize in economics. Amartya Sen also was a member of that advisor to that committee. They came up with the idea that gross domestic product is important as a signal of what an economy is doing. But it is not all, nor should we give it all the importance that we now tend to give to this one figure. It doesn't talk about how happy the people are, what is the quality of income distribution, what is the quality of life they have. All these qualitative and human aspects of life are not represented in the GDP. But GDP is important because it is one number that focuses your attention on what the country is doing And beginning from there, what are the other things that you need to look at? Now, the next step was for OECD to set up a committee of high-level group of experts, again headed by Joseph Stiglitz. They went a little forward and they said that in addition to GDP, we have to look at equality or income distribution pattern. We have to look at the impact on environment. We have to look at the kind of education that the children are getting and so many other things. Having done that, they came to sustainable development. And their view was you have 17 goals and 169 sub-goals. If you divide or distribute 100 marks among 169 sub-goals, each one gets so little that it becomes difficult to judge whether a country is doing well on this metrics of sustainable development or it is not doing well. So the high-level group of experts indicated 5 critical areas which they put on a dashboard, and they said that this is relevant for the developing countries or the low-income countries. I will not bore you because I do not remember exactly what those 5 are, but as I remember, those were income distribution and inequality, which they tried to combine into one measure: inequality adjusted income, education, infrastructure, quality of life, which is measured by access to good drinking water, access to electricity supply, and so on. So UNDP in their Human Development report adopted their recommendations, and they have oriented their this annual Human Development report to the recommendations of the high-level expert group. Now, incidentally, Jeffrey Sachs also oversees a publication on scores of sustainable development achievements, and that report is published by Cambridge University. He also has a dashboard where he identifies 5 or 6 transformational activities that may be undertaken by the low-income or the developing countries for reaching the sustainable development goal. I guess the whole point that they were trying to make is that there's a whole lot of things to do, but not each of them has the same importance for each country. So let us identify a few which are very important or which are critical for the developing countries and the low-income countries whose growth we are trying to accelerate, and where we are trying to include everybody so that in the process of growth, not too many are left out. So that is where the high-level expert group and Jeffrey Sachs meet on identifying the critical areas where efforts should be made. Now, going back to the use of resources, the question is, are we using more resources than we should? And if we are, what are the ways to reduce it to a level which is sustainable? So sustainability becomes the result of a way you measure. That is a difficult area that anyone gets in beyond the rhetorics. One was the UN Habitat. They came up with an idea of the comprehensive wealth system or some such name. And the pioneer of that was Sir Partho Dasgupta. I always enjoy mentioning Partho Dasgupta because his father was a professor at Dhaka University, went over to Presidency College in Kolkata, and they are from Barishal. And Sir Partho has, I think about 10 years ago, he was knighted. And he was one of the leading figures on resource economics and on this environmental degradation and so on. He, along with Kenneth Arrow and a large number of research concerned people, they had carried out a test whether we are using more resources than we are. Now, economics are people with they are not very wise on the system of knowledge. So they applied interest rate as a measure of the cost of the resources that we are using. They find that the problem with interest rate is, if you look into the future and it is far away, you don't know what would be the interest rate. So your best guess is the closest to what is the interest rate now. And for various reasons, the market interest is not reflected in the transactions of money, lending and borrowing, and therefore you make up your number. There was an economist, Weisman. He had circulated a questionnaire to a number of tenured professors of economics in US universities, all of them having PhDs, and asked them, what is your guess of the best interest rate? The reply was either the interest rate which was prevailing in the market or something close to that. They used this interest rate and found that at that given interest rate, there was not an excessive use of resources, but in the meantime, technological changes also come in. So you get stuck with being very specific about how much resource you will use and how much resource you shall not use, unless it is very obvious and very palpable. You do not really know whether you are using more or using less. I refer to this comprehensive wealth system, where the main contention is that you have a finite set of resources in the world, and you can enhance the value of the resources only by making different use of those resources. My favorite example of that is, you have a field which is a commons, and the villagers can, there's a pasture land for the villagers. If you convert that into a engineering college, then you will get a good number of engineers, but you will deprive the cattle population of the food that they need. So you have a choice where you get the best outcome from use of a given resource. If you look at the way we have progressed in the last so many years, it would be a few centuries, that is how civilization and human progress has gone on, by making better use and more efficient use of the same resources, so that we get a better output, more output and better output. Now, the economists, being people with limited wit, went back to something which was put forward in the early 20th century by Pigot. And he had put forward a suggestion that those who create negative externality, externalities have to be internalized. So if you are causing harm to your neighbor by using the resources that are available to you, that fellow should be compensated. And you can't compensate that fellow directly, so you impose a tax on the negative externalities. At the global level, the pollution, climate change, etc., are all global phenomena. We can say that these are generated at the regional level, but at the end of the day or the end of the century, it adds up to a global impact. But it is very difficult for the world governance entity to take over the taxation jurisdiction, collect taxes, and then distribute it to among the various members according to some formula that they have not yet been able to come up with. So there you get stuck. But at the national jurisdiction level, there is the jurisprudence, there is a law of assigning, there is a law of determining the responsibility for causing harm. At the private level of litigation, this is done more easily. If someone's behavior, someone's conduct harms me, I can sue him in a court of law, and the court can decide X amount of compensation to me and so on. But at the global or even at the transnational level, that becomes pretty difficult. I may come to that when talk about the regional dimension of cooperation. Now, there are two economists who have been on the forefront of climate change. One is Sir Stern. He is a British economist, had been chief economist of the World Bank, and Nordhaus, who is a Nobel laureate, teaches at Yale University, who authored one of the most popular textbooks on economics, Samuelson's Economics. I think the 13th or 12th edition, he edited that one. By then, Samuelson must have grown much too tired of editing the same book. And Nordhaus has estimated the loss that the world incurs because of the climate change. Joseph Stern has given even sterner warning. Why wait? I mean, the climate change is so hazardous, and it is so unpredictable, and it is so irremediable that unless you stop it, you cannot avoid the harm. So he said, why? He warns that you must not wait. If an action is to be taken, it should be taken tomorrow, if not today. That is the kind of seriousness with which he has approached this subject. So there are many on the side of taking immediate action on climate change. But I understand the climate change reaches some obstruction because it either impacts the rate of growth that the countries are having. There is a disagreement or dispute between the developing countries, low-income countries, and the developed ones. The developing countries contend, I guess very rightly, that the climate deterioration is because of your behavior, and now we want to impose restriction also on us, which will constrain our growth. So this is a price that you are imposing on us for your benefit. That is not equitable. But the debate between the people who are a little more powerful than others, the result is more or less predetermined. You can't win. You may win the argument, but you may not win the case at the end of the debate. Now, there was a question that the UN system or the multilateral system are dominated by the state system, which is a fact. But as I said before, the state and the government representing the state are clearly identifiable entities. Once you leave that, you are in an universe where everything becomes so amorphous that you cannot attribute anything to anybody. So unless you are sure of who is asking for what, you do not know what is there. Now, in that context, there is a little known author, Ignatieff. He's a Canadian. He was a leader of the Canadian party that now has the prime minister, taught at Harvard, and then he became the president of a free university or some such name in Hungary, got into trouble with the Hungarian government. I don't know if he still is there or he has been driven out. Incidentally, that university was funded very generously by George Soros, among others. Now, he maintains that human rights are very important and these ought to be supported. But there is also a downside to the human rights issue. The human rights identifies groups which claim rights. And unless you agree that the communities have rights which are peculiar or specific to them, you cannot argue that individuals in that community also has that rights. Now he talks about the Aborigines in North America. Said they have all the rights that the white settlers in North America have. But when you insist that they must be given their rights retroactively, you create a situation which is very difficult to settle. So you create new problems. Secondly, once you say that they have to be given the rights and allowed to pursue the lives that they had lived, then you are also excluding them from the benefits of the progress that has been made by the other segments of the society. So he brings in all these critical issues that are involved in the human rights issues. So that is something that I guess we need to be concerned about. I wonder if many of you have lived in places where you are surrounded by the tribal population. When I was very young and I went to high school, lower classes, we lived in areas where we had many Shantals, and they lived their life. They were marginalized. They're still marginalized. If those of them who still survive, they are marginalized. Now, how do you bring them into the mainstream of the benefits of human society? That is a very critical question that we should ask. And if you go to the hill tracts or to northern Dinajpur or to Mymensingh border, you might come across the tribal population which live a very low level of human life. I mean, they must be lifted above. But then you can't sustain this upgradation of a human community by providing subsidy or by providing some support. They must be given the skill so that they can earn more and can join the economic activities which are dependent on the technology we have. Now, the technology, innovation of technology and the use of technology, this is an interesting issue. I think Deva said that technology does not work in a vacuum, which is very true. Now, if you look at the evolution of technology, you will find there are a few historical moments when there had been significant changes. One is the Industrial Revolution, which was initiated by the discovery or innovation of steam. There are some historians now which say that the Industrial Revolution was caused by the plague and the large-scale deaths in Britain. There was a shortage of labor, so they had to look for energy and power in non-human sources when they found coal. And the coal became the driver of expansion of UK. It went to the other European countries after adaptation to their economic, social conditions. That's one view. Now, the second or the third revolution came after the railway, after ocean-going vessels, and so on. We're now thinking of the fourth revolution to be initiated by information technology and this artificial intelligence. A few economists who have dealt with the subject in the US context, they do point to the fact that this artificial intelligence would reduce employment in the US economy. They have talked about US economy. So there would not be enough income to buy the products which the new technology can do. So they suggest that there should be a distribution of a minimum income to every citizen. Now, how do you finance this distribution? You have to tax. Now, when you propose raising the tax, there's a very strong opposition to raising the tax. You get into the real world problem that we want to solve. So that is the kind of difficulty that we have in adopting technology. For instance, coal is being discarded as a source of power, very rightly so. But there are countries which are dependent on coal. And if coal is given up at a very high rate, then those countries will get into a power shortage. If they get into a power shortage, their production system also suffers. So you have a lot of things that you go into in order to get back to a temperature which is slightly above the pre-industrial time. So you get into all these problems. Now to come to the regional issues, which Ambassador Karim was very kind, but the ethics of civil servant is that they always put on a mask and they forget and ask others to forget their names. The civil servants work for the government or the ministers, and whatever I did was on the instruction of the Prime Minister, and it happened only because the Prime Minister accepted it. The core idea there was that if you get too many people into the game, it becomes very difficult. If you're playing chess, it should be played only by two persons. So you are on a chessboard where the two major partners provide a basis for cooperation, and there's a flexible way of getting into the game other parties. That was the basic idea on which this cooperation framework was structured. Now, Ambassador Karim would remember that we worked hard to remove the bottlenecks that had existed since the 1974 agreement signed by Prime Minister Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Bangabandhu and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. So having and I guess Ambassador Karim did a very good job and very hard work in order to make that succeed. One interesting episode there was the Mata Muhuri, which is a small piece of land somewhere in Noakhali. And the debate was, where should the boundary lie? Both sides, that is India and Bangladesh, both sides agreed that we should go back to the original position and take the river or the canal which had divided the two states. Now, meanwhile, that canal or river had disappeared. And the maps also do not show where that river was. So the journey that the Columbus, like Ambassador Tarek made, was to look at the various maps as old as we could get hold of and identify where possibly these rivers could be. As far as I remember, we thought that in the old times, the big bazaars, marketplaces were located on the river bank. So there are some marks of these markets there. So we assumed that the river must have been there, and that should be the imagined line for demarcating the boundary between India and Bangladesh. That was agreed. And only recently I learned, a part of that was there was a government office of India and what do you call that? This Shoshan Ghat cemetery for the Hindus. And they said these are very dear to the people in that area. So if you could give it to us. And our joke was that you could not get free from this two-nation theory. You still think that Hindus are in India and not in Bangladesh. There are Hindus in Bangladesh also. However, we agreed that with that slight adjustment, we could settle that. Some time ago, I heard that the two countries had not resolved that dispute. That still is there. Meanwhile came this demarcation of the ocean. And having failed to reach an agreement, Bangladesh and India went to this arbitration under the UN law. And Bangladesh got the subsoil rights and India got the surface rights. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to practice. Anyway, what happened is the Indian side put forward the map which was enclosed with Radcliffe's award of the territories of India and Bangladesh. This goes back to 1947. So they had picked up something that we had intuitively used as an easy solution to a difficult problem that has been haunting us since 1974. Now there is something more to it. In 1945 or 46, before the subcontinent was partitioned, the government of India, British India, had set up an Indus Commission to resolve the dispute between the provinces on the Indus River. But before they could reach a settlement, came partition, so it did not complete its work. Subsequently, Indian constitution was amended in order to give the right of use to the states. And the law also provided for setting up commissions to resolve disputes between the states. 3 or 4 years ago, under the present government, Modi government, they had made further changes which sets up only one commission which can set up sub-commission for each dispute. Now, the underlying principle to me seems that the people who live on the river bank has a right on the river's resources. Now, if you accept that principle, that extends across the state borders. A principle cannot be confined, a basic principle cannot be confined to a state boundary. The way you greet may be, the way you start your greetings, you start your day, that may be peculiar to a particular community. But when it comes to use of resource that moves across the border, you have to recognize that the right to use it also moves across the border. That is where I guess the regional agreement on cooperation doesn't work. It underlying all these discussions and all the good wishes that all of us have, I mean, regardless of who I am, where I am, which country I belong to, all of us want a peaceful world, but a peaceful world where I have more of the claims of the resources that I claim than you have. So that conflict between having a better peaceful world and having more of the shares of the rest of the world, that is there, that is not going to leave us very soon. The result is a complicated position with respect to the use of the resources that would benefit all the countries, both countries plus others. Now, in addition to that, we have an agreement for coastal shipping with India. The idea was that Bangladesh have very few ports. We have Chittagong, now we are building another port, and Mongla, it has very shallow draft, so vessels cannot reach there. It bars about 100 miles away from the port, and then lighters take the goods to the shore. So we wanted access to the Indian ports. So India and Bangladesh signed the agreement. For the inland water transport, the agreement allows India to export to the third countries through Bangladesh. If you just planted that in the coastal shipping arrangement, then we could use Indian ports for third country export. Some or other, whoever might have overlooked it, the coastal shipping agreement didn't include that clause that we can use Indian ports for third country export. Now, there are committees headed by secretaries of the two countries which meet at regular intervals to identify the problems and resolve the problems as much as they can. My feeling is that they approach it in a very formal, ritualistic way. They meet to set up the agenda, they meet to agree on the agenda, then they take up the agenda, then they resolve the agenda. So these 2 or 3 meetings at the interval of 3 months or 6 months take about 2 years. that happens perhaps because when Ambassador Karim and I were working, we had the agenda given to us, which was basically resolving 1974 agreement issues and then to move forward. But now they are getting into new areas and a new agenda, so they are taking a little more time. But at the end of all the debates, it depends on the mutual trust of the parties. Cooperation cannot take place unless there is trust, a high degree of trust between the cooperating parties. And that depends also on the domestic situation, on the leadership's views, and so on. But I guess I wonder if Karim would agree with me that Bangladesh and India are geographically so located that both would benefit from cooperation. In addition, Bhutan and Nepal, they are landlocked and must have convenient access to the ports, which India can provide, which Bangladesh can provide. And that goes also for the northeastern states of India. I mean, there's a kind of constrained geographical area. It's part of India, but its access to the sea, its access to the rest of India is convenient through Bangladesh. So it is so geographically mixed up that the two countries, they may will or they may not will, but the geography compels them to cooperate. In addition to that, Bangladesh gets access to the large market of India if the trade arrangements are non-reciprocal, because if on day one we have to open up an Indian goods get into the market, there will be a shock to the domestic production. So the trade agreement has to protect the growth of Bangladesh industry, but allow also a degree of competition through export. And trade flourishes easily between countries where the transportation cost is low. That is what is an argument for cooperation between Bangladesh and India. So what I feel is that on the global scale, Bangladesh has played its cards very carefully and with a lot of deliberations. Anything which helps the whole world will be to our advantage, and we have always put forward and advanced those causes. As to the regional cooperation, Bangladesh and India can kind of reduce the benefit to each other, but if they work together, the benefit goes up for both. It has a very huge multiplier effect, but that has to be done on the basis of supporting each other's interest, or not on the basis of trying to get a larger share of the cake for myself or a smaller share of the cake for the others. I guess having said that, is there anything more that I need to say? Okay, let me conclude with one particular remark about politics which came up. There was a professor of politics, Harold Laswell. I wonder if Karim in his undergraduate days read him. He taught at Yale and then came to MIT. He wrote a book on politics, and its title was Politics: Who Gets What, When, How. When you look at economics, that is what you produce, what you get, and what you consume. So he links politics and economics in terms of production and distribution of the goods that you produce. That basically remains the political game. Even he wrote perhaps in the 60s, 1960s, I think about close to a century afterwards, that remains valid. And globally and regionally, we are playing a political game, and the game outcome would be beneficial to all of us if we follow the rules of mutual benefit and enhancing each other's benefit. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, sir, for your, you've always been a philosopher scholar in addition to being a very successful civil servant and administrator. Thank you very much for your enlightening statement and words of wisdom which you have shared with our faculty and students. My job has ended because the formal part of the substantive discussions of this seminar today are over. There is another small add-on, which is a distribution of prizes to winners of essays. And for that, I'll hand over to Marufa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, honorable guest. We are almost at the end of our today's long day session, which is most exciting part, I suppose. I am seeing all the students are waiting for the morning. Just could you, one of you, could you please share the slide? I just wanted to give a very brief background of the essay competition that Global Studies and Governance organized the last 2 months. So the essays, the theme was actually our planet and our future, which is actually derived from the UN global theme, equitable and sustainable development. I'm very happy to inform all of you that we have received 75 essays from all over the country and from different schools and colleges. And these were actually the submission guidelines. We have targeted students from 10 to 12 grades, and also they will be writing an English essay, and of course following the reference and proper content wise. And there is also selection criteria that we have set down. Very importantly, we have gave importance to the content theme and also the language. And also we wanted to check, we actually run through the Turnitin, actually the plagiarism software. We run through this essays to evaluate. So these are the actually criteria. Based on this, we have identified top 10 essays. Now I would like to name all the winners, actually top 10, and among them we have 6 here. So please give a big round of applause. I want to name, those are the winners. Those are the winners. Ishtiaq Ahmed bin Yusuf, Samsul Arifin Khan Shams, Abdul Muqtadir Fahim, Farabi Ishraq, Hafsa Maisha Bari, Rafin Raihan, Hassan Al Rafid, SM Hassan Masum, Ahnaf Nafi, and Fayed Hossein Pranto, among which we have 6 here. So now I would like to request our honorable guest and the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Tanveer Hassan, PhD, and also Dr. Mashur Rahman. And also I would like to call upon Ambassador Tariq Karim and Professor Imtiaz Hussain to give them a small token of gift as a crest, as a prize winners. So would you like to stand here, sir, or go in front? However you like to. Yeah, I think going in front will be. So now I'm going to call upon the name, the 6, those who are present here. So please do come here one by one and take, yes, please. So the first person who is present here, the Samsul Arifin Khan Shams from Fauzdar Hart Cadet College. Certificate. The second, Hassan Al Rafid. You may come here from also from Fauzdar Hart Cadet College. Hassan Al Rafid, are you here? Okay. All right, great. So I would like to request all our students, the winners, those who are here, 6 of them, could you please come ahead? And because our honorable chief guest will leave us soon, so we want to take a group picture. And then we will, so Farabi Ishraq, Abdul Muqtadir Fahim, Rafin Raihan, and Hafza Maisha Bari, who is actually from Sir Johnson Wilson School, Dhaka, only person who is outside of Cadet College. Please do come and stand with our honorable guest. We would like to take a quick picture. Yes. Right. Can you give them the crest in their hand? হাতে দিয়ে দাও please সবাইকে. Could you please go, 2 of you go with the other side there? এখন চলে যাচ্ছে, ফুলটা নিয়ে আসেন. Thank you so much. Take the flower. Sir, we have a small flower for our honorable chief guest that we could not hand over. So this is the time, I think, is the best time. Could you please, one of my students, go there? Thank you, Deva. Thank you, Deva. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And now I would like to request Dr. Nazneen just to few words for thank you note, vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. The chief guest, Honorable Dr. Mashir Rahman, Economic Affairs Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister, Government of People Republic of Bangladesh. Guest speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Vikram K. Doraiswamy, the High Commissioner of India to Bangladesh. Guest speaker, respected Dr. Deva Bhattacharja, Member, CPD Board of Trustees, and Distinguished Fellow, CPD. Guest speaker, Mr. Miesepo, UN Resident Coordinator in Bangladesh. Professor Tanveer Hassan, Vice Chancellor, Independent University, Bangladesh. The moderator of Session 3 on Governing Sustainability, former Ambassador, Mr. Tariq Karim, Director, Center for Bay of Bengal Studies, Independent University, Bangladesh, and our most valued invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of International Center for Climate Change and Development, on my own behalf, Dr. Nazneen Khan would like to extend a very hearty thanks to all of you as an honorable speaker for gracing their important work and sharing with us their valuable findings and opinions today. I have been greatly privileged to propose vote of thanks to everyone present here this evening and those associated in organizing this event. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation to Dr. Mashir Rahman, our chief guest, for his valuable words of encouragement and appreciation. His Excellency, Mr. Vikram K. Doraiswamy, for expounding on current issues and inspiring us to adopt sustainable values within our resources. To Dr. Deva Bhattacharja for his analytical explanation on theory and practice in specific areas. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to Ms. Mia Seppo for exposing her views on event role on empowering us throughout the art of negotiation and motivation. We wish to express our gratitude to Director, Center for Bay of Bengal Studies and former Ambassador Mr. Tariq A. Karim for moderating session 3 on governing sustainability and proposed idea of collective participation on diverse area in future. We are extremely thankful to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Tanveer Hassan, who has been with us in all 3 sessions, share his deep knowledge and insight with us. We can be empowered to save our planet by our every step to the communities to make a meaningful environmental impact. Thank you, Professor Tanveer Hassan, for considering my proposal in the town hall meeting earlier and today for a wide version of plastic-free IUB campus as an agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, an event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels started rolling few months ago. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated colleagues of IUB who know their jobs are result-oriented. Well, I cannot thank everyone enough for their involvement and their willingness to take on the completion of tasks beyond their comfort zones. I would like to extend our thanks to the enormous cooperation in the organization in this evening. I truly thankful to Professor Salimul Haq, Director, International Center for Climate Change and Development, and our Deputy Director, Mr. Mizan Khan, Dr. Marufa Akhtar. I would like to include not names, but the teams, especially Office of the Vice Chancellor, CITS, Facilities Department, ON Department, Media and Public Relations, Organizing Committee, GSD Family, Center for Bay of Bengal, Global Studies Gatekeeper Student Association, and everybody, each and everybody. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to thank all of you for your patience and support. We express our gratitude for being with us this evening, for making this event a success. Thank you very much. So I'm requesting everyone to come up here for a group photo. Thank you.